My name's Andrew Gill. I'm chairman of the East Lancashire Western Front Association, and I also run the Burnley in the Great War website. My great uncle Frank Gill was killed in the First World War. He was aged 28 and serving with the 1st 5th Loyal North Lancashire Regiment. He was killed in Belgium in January 1917 and is now commemorated on the Men in Gate Memorial in Belgium. I think I first got interested in the Great War around about 30 years ago when I started reading through the local newspapers and reading the stories of the men from Burnley who went out and fought in the First World War, and realised that they weren't a great deal different to the people we were at that stage in our lives. They were fairly young lads, they went to the same schools, they worked in the same factories and lived in the same streets. So in some ways they were very similar to us, but had this really catastrophic event happened in their lives, and so many of them got killed at the time. Well, Burnley hasn't really got a proper war memorial with the names of all the soldiers from Burnley who were killed. There were over 3,500 men from Burnley killed in the First World War, and really because of that number, because of the enormity of it, there isn't anywhere big enough to record all the names. So when the internet started to develop, I realised that it was a fairly good medium for actually creating a memorial to these men, and because it never actually ever ends, you find more information out about the men as time moves on, and people sending photographs. It's an evolving thing rather than a fixed memorial which you have to make and that's it and you can't change. With the internet you can keep adding to it, so it was a really good medium to set up a kind of cyber memorial. Well, there's lots of different ways. I mean, there's quite a lot of information on the internet itself. Sites like Ancestry and the National Archives has a very good website. But going back 25 years ago, it was mainly done by having to go down to London to the Public Records Office and physically go through all their records and pull out information manually almost. We started going to actually see the battlefields about 25 years ago, and actually looking at where they were actually stationed and where they fought, and in many cases where they were killed. So, but nowadays most of it can be done on the internet itself. And then people send in contributions from all over the world. People from Australia send pictures of relatives from Burnley who were killed in the First World War, which we then put onto the website. There are lots of them. I mean, there's probably too many to mention. I mean, you know, some of the bravery, unrecorded bravery of some of these young lads is incredible. One guy who springs to mind is a soldier called Harold Mercer from Burnley, who volunteered for what was almost a suicide mission late on in the war in 1918, where he volunteered to go on a raid off the Belgian coast to stop German submarines attacking British boats. And it was almost a case of, if you volunteer on this mission, you don't come back. There was no real get-out route for them. He was actually killed on that raid, and his body was brought back, and he's now buried in Burnley Cemetery. But an incredibly brave man to volunteer for what nowadays would be an SAS mission. I mean, the Burnley in the Great War website, as I say, it's been going since 1996 now, so it's been going quite a long while, and it's added to every day, and almost every day somebody sends in a new photograph of a Burnley soldier who served and maybe survived, or a Burnley soldier who served and was unfortunately killed in France. And one thing it has brought out is just how widespread the families from Burnley have become, because people all over the world are now writing into the site who either lived in Burnley themselves, or their parents or grandparents lived in Burnley, and they're from absolutely everywhere in the world now, so you don't realise how many people spread out over a period of time.
The pals went with me. 3 of us. They were Benningham and Arthur Brunskill. We were pals together in the... You see, we all went to the Burnley Lads Club. and we decided to join. Well, a lot more joined from the Burnley Lads Club, and Mr. Riley, he was made a captain in, he run the Burnley Lads Club, and he joined up as well. About 6 o'clock in the morning. This was a full morning, July. No, it was light. And anyway, this shell came. We got to like a big shell hole where a shell had dropped before, previously. And Calvert and this other boy went round to the left, and I went round to the right of this shell hole. We didn't go down it. And, well, another shell came, and I was blown off my feet, flat onto the floor. Didn't know where I were for a minute. And when I picked myself up, these two were missing. There was only me there. And a bit of shrapnel had hit me in the arm, and another piece just across my leg. Well, there went another soldier within 60 or 70 yards, either side of me then. Oh, when they came back, they were glad to see me back, right enough, because, I mean, both my best friends were killed, you see. I saw one, but I didn't see the other. I saw the one when they brought him out. So him was a sergeant. He was a sergeant, my pal.
There was a Captain Riley as well.
Yes, he was killed. We'd only gone not 20 yards over the top when he fell. You see, we were sitting ducks. They told us week before we had to walk 20 yards, get over the top, and when we were getting over the top we could see us men falling back, what we hit, before they got over the top. And then we had to stay for a couple of minutes, not move. And that's when Captain Riley fell. We just got to that 20 yards when Captain Riley, that were, he used to run our club, Burnley Lads Club. He used to run that with other two. And well, in fact, he started the club in the first place. And it came down the line straight away. Captain Riley's gone. You see, straight away that came. Well, now we all stood there like dummies, like you are on a fairground and you're just somebody to pot at. That's just what we were like.
My name is Tom Norris. I am a member of the Burnley and Padiham branch of the Royal British Legion. I'm here this afternoon to just give you a few words about one of my relations, in fact my uncle, on my mother's side, who was killed in October 27th, 1914. Edwin joined the army because in Burnley, in the cotton mills, there's a lot of hardship and part-time working. Because Edwin had no work, because he wasn't a married man, he was only 17 years of age, he was the first to be laid off with being no work, and only people who they tried to keep on at the mill was people with families, because they needed to earn money to feed the family. In those days we know such things like social security, dole money. If you weren't working, there were no money, and there were no money to buy food. So Edwin decided, because he thought he was a burden on his brothers and sisters, because he was a working age, and in those days they started work at 12-year-old. So he'd been working for quite a number of years. His father had learnt him to weave, like he learnt all his daughters to weave, except his older sister, who was a spinner. He worked at Bob Emmett's on Shackleton Street, but his older sister, my Auntie Annie, worked at Ferndale Mill, the same company, as a spinner. So Edwin left a note in the family Bible, this is before the war started of course, that he thought he was a burden on the family and he wouldn't come home or they wouldn't see him unless he did well. So he went to an uncle in Blackburn, because actually he was born in Blackburn, was Edwin, And he went to this uncle in Blackburn and must have had a word with him because he'd been a long-serving soldier and he'd fought in the Boer War. So Uncle Tom had most likely said to him, best thing they can do, lad, to get a pair of boots and a shirt is join army. So, right, so Edwin decided to do this. So he went to Bury, and in Bury they had the Lancashire Fusiliers. But a part of the Lancashire Fusiliers was a battalion. It wasn't a really battalion, it became to be the 2nd Battalion, the Bury Militia. And so he joined the militia. This is before the war started. So as soon as the First World War was declared, Edwin Battalion, the militia, became to be the 2nd Battalion, Lancashire Fusiliers. So we're being classed as regular soldiers, they were first in the field at a place called Le Touquet. Now if you look on a map of France, you'll say Le Touquet, it's in Flanders and it's a nice seaside resort, very countrified, lots of farming, and what a beautiful little place. And you can't imagine in October, just outside Le Touquet, the first battles, sounds of battle between the Germans and our army, the British Army, was sounded. The company headquarters was in an old farmhouse at the head of a valley, and every morning the Germans used to shell it, but for the few shells what had come over, they weren't big enough to really cause any damage. And one of the officers used to step out of the farmhouse door every morning as soon as the Germans started shelling with the order papers for today, thinking it was floating flies. These flies are, you know, like they did in those days. Anyway, that particular morning, unknown to the British Army, the Germans had brought bigger field guns up. So the first couple of salvos flew over the top of the farmhouse, and our Edwin, I say, was in there as a company runner. And the 2nd and 3rd salvos, bang, and everybody who was in there in the company headquarters was killed. So Edwin Forrest was killed with a lot of his comrades, was in that farmhouse, and he has no known grave. But if he'd have been an officer, or even a sergeant, if you look at the records of that action, which they're all written down in a book, I think there might be a book about the Lancashire Fusiliers in the Burnley Reference Library. If not, if you go to the Fusiliers Museum at Bury, you'll be able to look up where the action what took place, where Edwin was killed. But because he was only a Fusilier, it just gave the sergeant's name, the officer's name, and so many Fusiliers was killed in this action. So his sisters and brothers were very upset when they got the message that Edwin had been killed in action. It gives in the local press his age of 21, but like I've already said, he joined with giving the wrong age, which was very common in those days, to give the wrong age. I reckoned he was about 19 and a half, if 20, when he was actually killed with giving the wrong age. His mother, my grandma, was very upset, and she couldn't believe that he was dead. She would not have it that he's been killed. Till one day they had a memorial service at St Kathleen's Church on Tomidon Road, and they decided to go to this memorial service. And the family story is he come walking out of the altar. They say in those days, before the war started, the Bury militia used to wear busby hats, just like the guards, and red tunics and dark blue pants. And he'd come home on leave, dressed in this uniform. And that day at this memorial service, Edwin walked out of the altar, and as he got to my grandma and his sisters, he vanished. And from that day on, then she believed that he was dead. But up to that time, she didn't believe he was dead. He was very close with being the oldest of the family, and my grandma was very close, and all his letters and other things where had been Edwin's possessions, she always kept in an old brown handbag. And she used to read them and cry about reading these letters. So when she died, my mother, for some unknown reason, put all the letters from Edwin and left one of his officers, a Lieutenant Everett, I think they called him. He'd wrote a letter saying Edwin was a very good boy, it was a very big loss to the regiment when he got killed. And she had that letter, and that letter, plus one of Edwin's final letters, was also kept in the family Bible. Because in those days, every family used to keep a big Bible. You perhaps only see them today in the church, the big brass clasps on them, don't them up. And a lot of families would write the family history down, who were the firstborn and everything in them. Today nobody bothers doing this, I don't think, do we? Not as religious, and I don't think the families are close now than they were in those days. Yeah, so thank you for listening to that little story.
My name is Roland Slater. I was Amy Astin's, or as she was then, Amy Foster, known as Heelan Lassie. She was my mother-in-law. She was born 1906 in Lindsay Street, Burnley. She was the 7th of 12 children, and she attended St Peter's School. Obviously when war broke out she was 8, and her and her mother decided to try and raise funds. So they started originally raising money for the Lancashire and Cheshire ladies' mobile field ambulance to be sent to France. After that, her mother dressed her in Highland costume, and later on she was given a proper black watch kilt from 2 ladies, and they started collecting money, started on a Saturday morning about 8 o'clock on St James Street outside the old Palace Theatre, and they used to stay there till about 4 in the afternoon. And on Friday afternoons they used to visit local mills and factories to catch the people coming out, obviously payday. She raised the money, and on the Saturday evening they used to take it to the town hall. This money was transferred into, made into parcels to be sent to Burnley soldiers or servicemen serving abroad. Each one contained cigarettes, tobacco, chocolate, cake, biscuits, notepaper, soap, and over the years I think over 4,000 was sent to the troops abroad. Also, during the time she was here in collecting, there was a local hospital, Bank Hall, and that was for wounded soldiers, so she raised funds for that. I think she managed to get a gramophone and took records in for them. And she got well known with a lot of the soldiers who were on leave, and they used to come into town to see her, and they used to have a lot of photographs taken with soldiers who were on either convalescent or wound leave or on leave as it was. When she collected these things, I think the estimated the money she raised was well over £4,000, which in those days was quite a lot of money. Also, towards the end of the war, in 1917, she collected for a place that's, I think it's changed its name now, but then it was St Dunstan's Hospital for blind ex-servicemen. She raised money for that. She raised over £900 for that. She went down to St Dunstan. She was invited down and presented the money to the founder, Sir Arthur Pearson, who was the owner and founder of the Daily Express. She kept in touch with St Dunstan's over the time, and towards the end of the war she started to collect for kiddish charities, other charities. At the end of the war she started the Heelan Lassie Fund for the Burnley War Memorial for Townley Park. So she organised concerts with her mother and collections for that. After the end of the war, about 1920, she left school and started work for Viva's Florist in the Market Hall in Burnley. Later on she bought the business and it became Amy's Floral Corner. She married Matthew Astin in 1931, ran the business. She had a daughter, who was my wife, Irene, in 1938. She carried on the business until her husband Matthew died in 1965. She retired from her business, sold it, but went to Briarfield to help a florist at Briarfield that she knew for another 10 years, finally retiring at 75, and then unfortunately 1998 she died, age 92.